Hey folks, welcome back to My Hidden Reads. I'm Eleanor and this is my July 2024 reading wrap up. So I read 17 things in July and I'm pretty sure they're all digital. So 17 things, that was a lot. It was a weird month. I mean, I did do the readathon, which didn't end up with me finishing many books, and I did record a couple of updates during the readathon but never got around to finishing the vlog, so that didn't happen. But it was also, I was finishing off Hugo reading, but I was also stress reading a lot of Austen variations and ended up listening to some audiobooks, and it was just a bit of a weird month, but it was a productive month, I guess. And this doesn't include any rereads of Austen variations. This is just Austen variations that's new to me. There's been a lot of rereading. It's a thing. Anyway, so what did I read in July? So the first thing I finished was Tasting the Future Delicacy 3 Times by Bao Shu. This was a Hugo story. I didn't love it. It was about technologically induced taste that made people go a little odd for dining experiences. It was a bit weird and a bit gross. The Year Without Sunshine by Naomi Kritzer. This was a lovely little story about, I think it was Neverlet, but it was about a neighborhood where an apocalypse happened and there was no sunshine, and this little neighborhood, suburban neighborhood, banded together to share resources, look after each other, defend their neighborhood from other neighborhoods who wanted to steal what they had, all sort of surrounding like the fact that one of the people in the neighborhood has a life-giving machine that must be running at all times because of a health issue. And so one of the things that helped them band together was trying to make sure they had enough power to run the generator in all circumstances for this machine. So that was quite sweet, really. I'm quite hopeful. I quite liked it. Then this one I've seen 2 different translations of this title. Never Meet Again in Life, or Life Does Not Allow Us to Meet by He Zi. This was another translated work and essentially involves colonizing other star systems and what it actually counts as human under law. Didn't really love this one either. It was interesting enough, but yeah, didn't love it. Then the novella The Mimicking of Known Successes by Malcolm Alder. This was a science fiction murder mystery sort of thing involving a queer couple who had gone to university together, parted ways, and then met up because of this supposed suicide, which might not actually be a suicide, and it's based around on a world where it's been colonized. It's a gas giant in our solar system that was colonized with terraformed platforms, and there's a whole bunch of science going on about is it possible to reseed our original Earth, and if they get the opportunity, if they can figure out the correct way to do it. So I really enjoyed that, and it's apparently the first in a series, so I'm looking forward to reading the second book. Then I read 4 Days at Netherfield, a new Jan Roland, in which during Jane's illness, Elizabeth arrives at Netherfield and meets a changed Mr. Darcy, who's actually not the way she's seen him the rest of the times, and that 4 Days at Netherfield completely changes the way they interact with each other. Then I ended up going back, because I've now got Kindle Unlimited, and picking up a whole bunch of variations from authors that I like that I'd never really had too much of an interest in reading before. It was a thing. So Mr. Darcy's Return by Jan Roland, which was after the ball, the Bingley's leave Netherfield, Jane's heartbroken, and then they hear that Netherfield has been reopened, but it's Mr. Darcy, not Mr. Bingley, and he gives Lizzie's not happy about this until he gives her information about Mr. Wickham that changes her perspective. Then Surviving Thomas Bennet by Shana G, which Thomas Bennet is the younger son jealous of his elder twin, marries the Mrs. Bennet we know, but the actual older Mr. Bennet is Lizzie's father and has a son and his daughters, and ends up being murdered with his son and wife by Thomas Bennet, but Lizzie survives because she and her sisters survive because they're not there, and then their friends protect them from her uncle. So that one was a bit weird. Admiral Thomas Bennet by Shana G, in which Thomas Bennet is the younger son, but this time goes off to sea to join the Navy, makes his fortune, marries Lizzie as his daughter, the other girls are her cousins. It's a whole thing. Then I read the novella Rose House by Arkady Matin for the Hugos. Didn't love this one. This was about AI and a house with its own, built by a really odd architect who is now dead. The house has its own personality, and then the police department gets called and says, this is a death notice because it's a person who's not supposed to have access to this house. Is it now a dead body in this house? But they need to wait for someone else, the one person who has the legal right of entry, to let them in. And it's creepy and weird and not my thing. So then I finished listening to The Queer Bible by Jack Guinness, which I'd been listening to on and off for a bit. And this is a collection of essays by queer people about the queer people and queer themes, arts, whatever, that have inspired them. So it was really interesting. Like, some of these essays are like by Elton John. So it's like famous queer people writing essays about other queer people who have inspired them. So that was really interesting. And challenged my thinking on a few things, crystallized my thinking on a few things. So definitely worth a listen or a read. I read the novella Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher, which was based on the idea that sometimes the Sleeping Beauty in the tower is a Sleeping Beauty in the tower for a reason, and some curses shouldn't be broken, because what happens when you break the curse could be worse than what happens if you just leave it be. So that was interesting. Retelling of a fairy tale, really liked it. Then I finished The Left-Handed Booksellers of London by Garth Nix. So this is the first in his Booksellers series, the second book of which I haven't read yet, but was on the Lodestar Award list. And so this is essentially set in the 80s, and this girl has just turned 18. She's going to London to work before she starts art school, and gets caught up in supernatural stuff, and it turns out her father is a mysterious figure in the supernatural world, and you've got the left-handed and the right-handed, and these are the people that manage the balance between the other world and the current world. And so the left-handed are the really active ones, and the right-handed are the researchers, and they're booksellers because they need some sort of respectable job. Really fun. One of the booksellers that the main character gets along with and sort of starts dating is gender fluid, I would say, in their gender presentation. Mostly presenting as male, but often with feminine clothing presentation. So I'm counting that as a queer. There was a lot of queer this month. Yes, so excellent. Getting there, almost there. So I also finished listening to, and this is during the readathon, The Palace, From the Tudors to the Windsors, 500 Years of British History at Hampton Court. This is by, I think his name is Gareth Russell. So it was a history book that essentially looks at various bits of British history that are connected to Hampton Court as a location. It was decent. I found myself drifting off and getting distracted sometimes. Just because of the way it was structured. It wasn't quite the way a structure that connected with me, but I can see why they did it, and it's full of interesting little tidbits as well. Then there were some more awesome variations. Blessing or Burden by Elaine Burkett, in which Lizzie inherits a fortune from her aunt, which is greater than her aunt thought it was. It's based on the idea that her aunt thought she was leaving Jane and Lizzie about £4,000 each, but because she doesn't understand investments, she doesn't actually understand that the stuff, what she invested for Lizzie, has actually created this massive fortune. And Lizzie, therefore, is inundated with suitors, is attacked a few times by suitors, completely and utterly finds herself wanting to give up the whole lot of them and doesn't know what to do. Once her mother wants to do something worthwhile with her money, doesn't know what, and ends up buying a property neighbouring Pemberley in Derbyshire and disguising herself as a widow with Charlotte's companionship, which is of course how she meets Mr. Darcy. Then there was How to Marry a Werewolf, which you've heard me talk about before. I re-listened to the audiobook. This is Gail Carriger. This is one of my favourite Gail Carriger novellas. I'm counting it as queer main characters because while the two main characters in the book, it's actually a heterosexual romance, it's got Biffy and Lyle in fairly prominent roles. So lovely. I love that book so much. It's a bit of a comfort read. And then Battle of the Dragons by Sydney Sellier. It's the newest Sydney Sellier variation. And so in this one, turns out Mrs. Bennet's aunt, so Lizzie's great aunt, was estranged from her family as a young woman when she married someone that they didn't want her to marry. And it turns out she's been married to a baron, a viscount, and then a duke. And so she's now a dowager duchess, and she looks up her family to see what's happening, moves to Meryton, and tries to provide some guidance to the Bennets. And then this whole bunch of others. There's other secrets hidden in their lineage as well. And then finally, the last thing that I read in July was An Epic Surprise, which is a new Shana Grandison novel. In this particular one, it's one where it turns out, again, hidden lineages that the Bennets don't know about, hidden connections brought about by a tragic circumstance involving the high seas. It's again, there are secret nobility in the Bennet family line and a tragedy. This is one of Shana Grandison's favourite tropes, actually. Secret nobility in their family line and a tragedy ends up meaning they become higher in society than Mr. Darcy expects. Those were the 17 things I read in July. I haven't gone into them in very much detail because there were so many. There were 4 that had significant queer characters. There were 2, as far as I'm aware, that were authors of colour, the 2 translated works. A reasonable reading month. I think there was probably a lot of trash, but that's what I tend to gravitate to when I'm stressed, and I've been stressed because July is always a stressful month. That is what I read. I am way ahead of my goal in terms of total books for the year, which is great, which is much better than last year. I will, I think, soon do an update on my goals now that we're past the middle of the year. I just need to actually figure out add up what books go to which goal, and so I actually have an update. Always happy to discuss books in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you all again really soon. Bye.